At 2 a.m., during New York's worst blizzard in 50 years, every radio station went silent, except one. From the depths of my collection, the Nightmare Maestro brings you a tale that will make you question every voice in the static. The digital clock in Peter Kim's radio booth flickered between 1:59 and 2 a.m. as the backup generator hummed beneath his feet. He'd spent 15 years behind this microphone, choosing the graveyard shift because it felt more authentic, real people with real stories, calling in during their darkest hours. After his wife's death in the blizzard of 17, these nocturnal connections became his lifeline. The night shift stopped being a choice and became a calling. Outside, Manhattan had disappeared under the worst blizzard in half a century, transforming the familiar cityscape into an alien wasteland of swirling white. The WNIC studio, normally alive with the buzz of late-night programming and fluorescent lights, sat dark and silent, except for his small recording booth, powered by emergency systems. Peter adjusted his headphones, watching ice crystals form intricate patterns on the window. His voice, perfected over years of late-night radio, carried through the dead airwaves. You're listening to Night Frequency with Peter Kim, keeping you company through the blackout. If you're just joining us, most of Manhattan lost power about an hour ago. We're running on backup power tonight, folks, so if you're out there in the dark, you're not alone. Lines are open. He glanced at the temperature display, -15 and dropping. The wind howled against the windows, sheets of white obscuring the city lights. The studio felt different tonight, emptier, hollower. In all his years of broadcasting through storms, something about this night felt wrong. The usual ambient noises had been replaced by an almost tangible silence that seemed to press against his eardrums. The first call came in at 2:03 a.m. As a veteran of late-night radio, Peter had fielded thousands of calls, conspiracy theorists, lonely souls, occasional pranksters. But something in the static made his skin prickle. "Hello, you're on Night Frequency," he said, his voice steady despite the interference. Through the white noise, a woman's voice emerged, tight with confusion. "I'm on East 86th. Something's wrong with the people outside. They're walking backward through the snow. All of them, like they're being rewound." Peter's hand froze on the control panel. 7 years ago, during the blizzard that took his wife, witnesses had reported similar phenomena, strange movements in the snow, people walking backward. The police had dismissed it as hysteria. He'd spent years researching similar incidents, finding patterns in old newspaper archives, but never on air. Never during his show. "Can you describe exactly what you're seeing?" he asked, his professional demeanor masking the tremor in his voice. "They're just walking backward, perfectly straight lines. The wind isn't affecting them at all. It's -15 degrees, but they're not hunched over or covering their faces. They're not even leaving footprints in the fresh snow. It's like..." Her voice caught. "It's like they're not really here. Like I'm watching a film being played in reverse." The calls started flooding in, each one making Peter's blood run a little colder. From his years of hosting, he knew the difference between coordinated pranks and genuine fear. These calls carried the unmistakable edge of truth, the kind that makes you question your own sanity. A taxi driver at Columbus Circle, his voice carrying 30 years of New York street wisdom, reported with professional detachment. "Look, I've seen every kind of crazy in this city, but the physics is all wrong. My passengers, 3 Wall Street types, they paid their fare in reverse. Bills going back into their wallets, doors opening backward, them walking backward into the storm. The snow around them, it moved like water in reverse, filling in their footprints before they made them." A trauma nurse at Mount Sinai, her clinical tone cracking with disbelief, described the medical impossibility unfolding before her. "Patients are rising from their beds, but their vitals, they're showing temporal anomalies. Heart monitors are running backward, Roman 4 drips flowing in reverse. Their body temperatures are dropping, but they're moving with purpose, like they're being guided. And their faces, there's no muscle tension, no signs of hypothermia despite the cold. It defies every medical principle I know. Peter's producer would normally be screening these calls, weeding out the pranks and coordinated jokes. But tonight, he was alone in the station, and something about the callers' voices, their shared tone of bewilderment and growing dread, made his skin crawl. Each description added another layer of impossible detail. The way the backward walking people's clothes didn't move in the wind, how their hair remained perfectly still, the strange smoothness of their faces. They're all heading west, a city planner from Hell's Kitchen reported, his urban development expertise lending weight to his observations. The pattern is deliberate. I'm looking at the street grid from my window. They're converging on a specific point, following invisible lines that shouldn't exist in the city's layout. And their faces, there's something architecturally wrong about them. Too symmetrical, like frozen blueprints of human expressions. Peter pulled up the city map on his phone, his hands trembling slightly as he marked each caller's location. The pattern emerged with chilling clarity. The backward walking figures were all moving toward a single point, the old WXNY building on 11th Avenue. His throat tightened as he recognized the address. The building had burned down in 1978, killing 23 people when a faulty space heater sparked during another historic blizzard. Now it was just an empty lot, surrounded by chain-link fence and frozen weeds, a forgotten tragedy in the city's history. As he connected the final dot on his map, his phone died without warning. The backup generator coughed once, twice, and the emergency lights dimmed, leaving him in a cocoon of shadows broken only by the pale glow of his broadcasting equipment. "If you're just joining us," Peter spoke into the microphone, his breath visible in the cooling booth, "we're tracking an unusual phenomenon across the city. Multiple callers report." He paused as the next call came in, the static louder now, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat buried in snow. "I know what's happening," a gravelly voice crackled through. Peter recognized the cadence of a veteran broadcaster. "I'm Richard Martinez, former technical director at WXNY. February 13th, 1978. I was working that night, trying to keep us on air through the blizzard. But something else was broadcasting beneath our signal." Peter's hands trembled as he checked the caller ID, signal unavailable. His research into the '78 blizzard had mentioned Martinez. He died in the fire, found in the control room clutching a logbook filled with frequency readings. "Mr. Martinez, that was 46 years ago." Time doesn't matter in the signal. Martinez's voice carried the weight of decades of waiting. "We thought the space heater started the fire, but it wasn't that simple. That night, we picked up something in the static, a frequency that shouldn't exist. It made everything run backward. The tape machines, the clocks, even the fire. It burned in reverse, trapping us in a moment that never ends." The temperature in the booth dropped another degree. Peter pulled up his archived research files, newspaper clippings, incident reports, witness statements. "The official report listed 23 victims," he said. 23 bodies, Martinez corrected. "But there were more. Every major blizzard since then, the signal gets stronger, pulls more people in. We're all here, frozen between frequencies. And you, Peter Kim, you've been broadcasting to us for years, ever since your wife joined us in 17. Peter's blood turned to ice. He'd never mentioned his wife on air, never talked about how they'd found her walking backward through the snow, her face peaceful despite the cold. The ice crystals on his window spread in patterns that moved counterclockwise, forming dates of every major blizzard since 1978. Each date corresponding to missing persons reports, bodies found days later, all walking backward through the snow. "How many others?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Count the blizzards," Martinez replied. "Count the missing. We're all here in the signal, waiting, listening, walking back to where it began. And tonight the signal is strong enough to bring us all home." The temperature in the booth had dropped to near freezing. Peter's fingers were stiff as he adjusted the levels, each caller now adding pieces to a puzzle he'd spent years unknowingly assembling. The pattern wasn't just in the locations or the dates, it was in the frequencies themselves. Dr. Liz Hill, a quantum physicist from Columbia University, called in with urgent clarity in her voice. "I've been studying temporal anomalies for 20 years. What's happening tonight, it's a resonance cascade across time. Each blizzard creates conditions where normal physics breaks down. The backward walking, it's time trying to resolve a paradox." Peter pulled up the building's history on his laptop before it died, cross-referencing with his personal research. Every major blizzard since 1978 had created the same conditions: atmospheric pressure dropping to specific levels, temperature hitting exact marks, static electricity building to impossible readings. The same conditions that had killed his wife, that had claimed countless others. The TV station. A city preservationist called in, her architectural expertise lending weight to her observations. "I'm looking at the site now. The empty lot, it's not empty anymore. The building's there, but wrong. Like a blueprint overlaid on reality. People are walking through the walls, through time itself. The structure exists in multiple moments simultaneously." More calls poured in, each from experts whose knowledge painted pieces of the impossible truth. A meteorologist describing weather patterns that defied physics. An electrical engineer measuring frequencies that shouldn't exist. A temporal mechanics theorist whose life's work suddenly made terrible sense. The backup generator gave one final wheeze. In the sudden silence, Peter realized he could no longer hear the wind outside. The storm had created a vacuum, a pocket of stillness where sound moved differently. Through his headphones, beneath the static, he began to hear something else, a broadcasting signal that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, carrying echoes of voices from decades of frozen nights. In the darkness of the booth, Peter finally heard the full truth beneath the static. It wasn't just a signal, it was time itself, compressed into frequencies, playing backward through layers of frozen moments. His muscles twitched, wanting to move in reverse, to unsay every word, unwrite every moment that had led him to this night. The phone lines lit up all at once, every lead blazing despite the power failure. The calls came simultaneously, a chorus of voices he now recognized. His wife, Martinez, every lost soul from every blizzard, all speaking in perfect synchronization. "The signal is strong now, strong enough to pull us all back to the station, back to the moment before the fire, before the cold, before time froze us in place." Through his headphones, Peter heard his own broadcasts from years past, playing in reverse. Show after show where he'd unknowingly been reaching across time, broadcasting not to the living, but to those caught in the static. His late-night radio show hadn't been random, he'd been drawn to it, pulled by the same signal that had taken his wife, that had been gathering them all since 1978. The window's reflection showed his face transforming smooth and peaceful like the others, years of grief and searching sliding away like melting snow. Behind him, impossible in the building's layout, stood the WXNY building as it had been in 1978, its windows alive with backward-moving light. Through the static in his headphones, he heard the original broadcast, the first signal that had torn a hole through time. The truth crystallized in his mind like frost patterns on glass. Every late-night show, every connection with lonely souls in the dark, he'd been building this moment, gathering frequencies until the signal was strong enough to bridge the gap. His show, Night Frequency, wasn't just broadcasting to the city. It was broadcasting to the spaces between moments, to the frozen pockets of time where the lost still walked, trying to find their way back. The digital clock on Peter's console began to spin backward, its red numbers blurring into streaks of light. His archived research files flashed across his computer screen in reverse years of investigation into temporal anomalies, missing persons reports, and the WXNY fire, all leading to this moment. Or perhaps leading from it, time's arrow now pointing in both directions at once. Outside the booth's window, snow fell upward, each flake ascending into a sky that grew darker with every passing minute. The temperature dropped so low that his breath crystallized instantly, forming delicate patterns that hung suspended in the air before dissolving in reverse. Each crystal contained a fragment of memory, his wife's last broadcast during the 17 blizzard, Martinez's final transmission in 78, every voice that had ever reached through the static. Through his headphones, Peter heard layers of broadcasts overlapping his own shows playing backward, interviews with callers who hadn't called yet, warnings about dangers already past. The recording equipment whirred, tapes spinning counterclockwise, capturing sounds from the future and erasing them into the past. His entire career as a late-night host hadn't been random. He'd been unconsciously building this moment, gathering frequencies until the signal was strong enough. The signal doesn't just broadcast, he realized, speaking into the microphone that no longer felt like his own. It records. Every voice, every moment, every death in the snow, all preserved in layers of static, like insects in amber. He checked the broadcast frequency, 87.9 FM. A frequency that shouldn't exist, squeezed into the space between official channels, where lost souls had been gathering for decades. Dr. Hill's voice crackled through one final time. The resonance cascade is complete. Time isn't just moving backward, it's converging. Every blizzard, every death, every broadcast, they're all happening simultaneously. The station is a nexus point, a place where temporal physics breaks down completely. Through the studio window, the modern city skyline transformed into the old WXNY building, fully intact. In its lit windows, he saw figures moving backward through different layers of time, the 23 victims of the 78 fire, the missing from subsequent blizzards, his wife's final walk through the 17 storm. All of them caught in the signal's pull, trying to find their way back to the moment before everything went wrong. The booth's temperature plummeted further, ice crystals forming intricate patterns that spelled out timestamps. February 13th, 78, November 30th, 92, January 15th, 3, December 26th, 17, every major blizzard that had claimed lives. Every night the signal had grown stronger. The dates spiraled backward, connecting through the static like a frozen spiderweb of lost time. As the ice crystals spread across his console, Peter noticed something he'd missed in all his years of research. His own voice, echoing from different points in time, had a peculiar harmonic quality. Playing his old broadcasts simultaneously, he realized with growing horror that he wasn't just investigating the phenomena, he was its epicenter. Each comforting word to lonely souls in the dark had been a tuning fork striking reality at precisely the wrong frequency. His late-night radio voice, cultivated over 15 years, hadn't just been soothing insomniacs and night shift workers. Its specific resonance had been fracturing temporal physics, creating microscopic cracks in time that widened with every broadcast. The patterns in the blizzards weren't random, they followed the growth of his audience, each new listener becoming another point of temporal distortion. The truth hit him with devastating clarity. His wife hadn't just died in the 17 blizzard, she'd been his most devoted listener, tuning in every night since before they met. Every victim, every backward walker, had been connected to night frequency in their final moments. His desperate attempts to understand the phenomena after her death, to reach out to more lost souls, had only widened the temporal fissures. "I've been the antenna all along," he whispered into the microphone, watching his words crystallize in the sub-zero air. Not just broadcasting to the lost, creating them. Every show, every connection, every sympathetic word. I've been fracturing time, carving out spaces where the signal could grow stronger. My voice became the very thing that breaks reality. The realization brought an even deeper horror. The WXNY fire of 78 hadn't started the phenomenon. It had been a desperate attempt to stop it. Martinez and his team had discovered what human voices at certain frequencies could do to the fabric of reality. They'd tried to burn the station down to prevent what was coming, but the fire had only frozen them in time, creating the first crack that Peter's broadcasts had been widening for 15 years. Through the static, he heard his wife's voice from 17, not as a memory, but as a transmission from a moment still occurring. "I tuned in every night, Peter. Your voice. It changed something in me, in all of us. We're not walking backward through time. We're walking toward you, toward the voice that's been calling us home. Every word you speak creates another path through the snow." The temperature in the booth dropped to absolute zero as Peter faced the impossible choice. Continue broadcasting, knowing each word fractured time further, but might eventually save those already lost in the frequencies, or end night frequency forever, sealing the lost in their temporal prison, but protecting future listeners from his deadly resonance. His hand hovered over the broadcast switch as ice crystals formed the final pattern, not dates or frequencies, but a message that had been hidden in the static all along, encoded in his own voice. Every voice breaks time. Every listener becomes eternal. Every frequency finds its home. As his hand touched the broadcast switch, Peter heard his voice echoing from tomorrow's broadcast, even as he heard himself signing off yesterday, while his present words crystallized in the frozen air. In the spaces between frequencies, in the silence between stations, every choice he had made, would make, and was making rippled through time like static through snow. If this story resonated with you, make sure you're tuned to the right channel by subscribing to the Nightmare Maestro's archives. What memories would you hear if you could pick up broadcasts from your past? Share your thoughts in the comments. Just be careful which frequencies you tune into.